Brown Book of the Hitler Terror by Lord Marley. Chapter 6, Part 2. The Campaign Against Culture. Cleansing of the Prussian Academy of Poets. We are not here concerned with whether the Prussian Academy of Poets has produced any positive and really creative work during the existence of the Weimar Republic. Measured by their swastika successors, the poets who have been ejected from the Academy or forced to resign from it are indeed giants. First among the purged members of the Academy is Thomas Mann, the Nobel Prize winner and perhaps the most representative writer of bourgeois Germany. His crime was that in recent years he had been drawing closer to a social democratic standpoint, and had even on several occasions raised his voice against deliberate judicial murders, as in the cases of Sacco and Vanzetti and Ráhosi. He once described the National Socialist Party as the most noxious refuse of the age, and this crime will never be forgiven him. His brother, Heinrich Mann, tried to maintain the position of a free and independent mind. He caricatured the middle class of Imperial Germany, der Untertan, and also of the Republic, die Große Sache. He supported the Amsterdam International Anti-War Movement, and he has therefore, like his brother, had his books burnt, and he himself has been hunted out by Hitler's culture bearers. Jacob Wassermann is another of the writers who has incurred the Nazis' hatred. His books have been translated into many languages. His chief crime is that he is a Jew, and that he has expressed liberal ideas in his novels. Alfred Doblin, by profession a doctor in a working-class quarter of Berlin, also wrote a number of fantastic and, to some extent, exotic novels. Die drei Sprünge de Wang Lun, Wallenstein, Bürger, Mira und Giganten. His last novel was Berlin Alexanderplatz. In public debates, Doblin described himself as a class-conscious bourgeois. He experimented a great deal in his style and treatment, somewhat like the Irishman James Joyce in the American Dos Passos. Franz Werfel, who never went outside the range of bourgeois ideas, was the pioneer of expressionism 20 years ago. His novel Verdi won him great popularity. The Nazis could not leave him alone. Others ejected were René Schickele, the German poet of Alsatian origin, and Leonhard Frank, author of the anti-war book Der Mensch ist gut and the novels Die Räuberbande and Die Ursache. Although he had been moving to the right during recent years, his past was enough to win for him the Nazis' hate. Dramatists turned out of the Academy included Georg Kaiser, whose talent was unique though extremely anarchist in tendency, and Fritz von Unruh, the dramatist of the Weimar Republic. Bernhard Kellermann, a gifted story writer of liberal tendencies, the poets Mombert and Rudolf Panwitz, and Ludwig Fulda, a writer of comedies, were all ejected. One of the few German women writers of any literary ability, Ricarda Huch, resigned from the Academy early in April. Among the politically colorless members of the Academy, such as Oskar Lurka and Jacob Schaffner, Gerhard Hauptmann must also be mentioned. These were allowed to remain in the Academy. Hauptmann, who wrote the story of the Weavers, had already been through many transformations. During the war, he was one of the 93 intellectuals who signed a manifesto supporting the warlords. After the war, he became the official poet of the Weimar Republic. And now he maintained a determined silence when the Brown Terror was driving the best bourgeois writers and scientists out of the country. And now for the men whom Rust, the Nazi Minister of Education, has brought into the Prussian Academy of Poets. The leading figure is Hans Jost, who once eagerly supported the revolution. But the crime of November 1918 is now forgiven. He is the only National Socialist writer who has achieved a certain reputation. At present his Schlageter drama is being played, on instructions from the Hitler government, in hundreds of German theatres. Its hero declares, "When I hear the word culture, I get my Browning ready." Herr Rust's special attractions in the Academy, apart from Hans Carossa, are quite insignificant writers like Emil Strauss, Will Vesper, Wilhelm Schaffer, Agnes Miegel, and Peter Dörfler. Hans Grimm wrote a novel on The Nation Without Room for Expansion, and Boris von Munchausen has written slight ballads expressing German sentiments. In their endeavor to find names of any kind of significance, the National Socialists even approached the poet Stefan George, the most snobbish and superior of all German poets, hoping to be able to use his name to grace Adolf Hitler's cultural policy. Brown Poetry. Dr. Joseph Goebbels, Minister of Propaganda in the Third Empire, wrote a novel called Michael, A German Destiny in Diary Form. Michael, the yearning German soul, has visions. Evil appears to him in the form of Ivan the Russian, who tries to entice him into Bolshevism. Michael's soul struggles with the tempter. But I am stronger than he. Now I have him by the throat. Now I hurl him to the ground. There he lies. The death rattle in his throat and bloodshot eyes. Perish, carrion. I trample on his brains. And now I am free. That is the spirit which makes a man worthy of the Hitlerized Academy of Poets. I trample on his brains. Perish, carrion. The notorious writer Hans Heinz Ivers, who was appointed by Goebbels as head of the Association of German Authors after it had been brought into conformity, has not yet been officially admitted to the Academy of Poets. His pornographic novels, Alraune and Der Vampyr, were subsequently put on the list of filthy and disgusting literature by the Nazis themselves, and they were the only ones which really deserved it. But he is the official biographer of Horst Wessel, the hero of National Socialism. On Hitler's birthday, a Horst Wessel play by Evers was broadcast by the German wireless. This writer's existence had been completely forgotten for many years, until he was resurrected to be the official poet of the Third Empire. In 1922 Ivers wrote a foreword expressing great sympathy for the Jews to Israel Zangwill's Die Stimme von Jerusalem. But the state of the market has altered since then, and Evers has become an anti-Semite. Thus, the Prussian Academy of Poets has been reconstructed under the banner of the spirit which expresses itself in such an awakening lyric as the following: All the little birds are already there. Nun Ade and All Little Birds. 1. Now adieu, my dear fatherland. At Strasburg a great lamentation begins. Hail to thee in thy crown of victory. A summons thunders through the land. Rosa Luxemburg is floating in the canal. Karl Liebknecht is hanging on the tree. 2. All little birds are already there. All little birds, all. Thrush, finch, and tit. And the Reichsbanner black-red. What a pity that there's no gold. Forever a pity. From Germany Awake, the Small Nazi Songbook, Edition B, published by Paul Ehren, Sulzbach, Oberpfalz, 8th edition. It must not be thought that this gem of brown poetry, broadcast in the 8th edition, is not typical. There is no difference between this and the most popular Nazi songs. When Jewish blood spurts from under the knife, things will be twice as good as before, or The red brood beat them to a pulp, storm troops are on the march, clear the way. The campaign against un-German music. Herr Joseph Goebbels, Reich Minister of Propaganda, told the German theatre managers and actors on May 9th that art comes from ability and not from the will. By way of illustrating this fine sentiment, we give below a further list of losses to German art. Bruno Walter, Otto Klemperer, and Fritz Busch were always reckoned among the best creative artists of Germany. For some years Otto Klemperer directed the Kroll Opera House in Berlin, and under him it became a centre of modern music. It was he who brought forward Hindemith and Kurt Weill. Klemperer was subsequently appointed to the State Opera House in Berlin, where he continued his work along the same lines. Now he has been forced to give up his conductor's baton because he is of Jewish origin. Bruno Walter, a conductor with a reputation throughout the world, is a Jew, and as art comes from ability, he may no longer conduct in Germany. His place is taken by a certain Herr Fusel, official musician to the Nazis. He was commander of a large brass band, in connection with whom no one can use the terms art and ability. But he will now show the awakened German nation how music is made. Busch, the musical director in Dresden, is fair, and so his Aryan origin cannot be disputed. He is a conservative, but as it happens not a Nazi. He brought a new era of fame to the Dresden Opera House. During the national revolt, a Nazi denunciator appeared on the stage in the middle of a performance and demanded that Busch should resign his post. Berlin, March 8th. Yesterday evening 60 Nazi stormtroopers occupied the stage of the Municipal Opera House during the performance of Rigoletto, led by the famous conductor Busch. According to the account given by the Vossische Zeitung, the leader of the Nazis told the audience that in the future he himself would direct the theatre, and that the conductor Strieger would conduct the orchestra instead of Busch. As Busch nevertheless attempted to continue conducting, a terrific uproar arose among the Nazis who were present, and Busch was compelled to leave, while Strieger took his place at the conductor's desk. The best known German pianist is Arthur Schnabel, who in the course of 30 years' work has developed into an interpreter of the great music written for the piano. He conducted an advanced class for piano music at the Berlin Academy of Music, and he has been turned out because he is a Jew. 2 of his colleagues have also been turned out of the Academy. Emil Feuermann, who is now the only German cellist of any standing, and Leonid Kreutzer, a good pianist and teacher. The first-rate violinist Karl Flesch has been dismissed. Also the well-known conductors Oskar Fried, Fritz Stiedry and Gustav Brecher, as well as the prominent pianist Bruno Eisner. Of the creative musicians in Germany, Marx von Schillings immediately joined the Nazis. His compositions are not original, and his conducting nowhere gets beyond the formal pattern. Schillings, who under the Republic accepted high positions, became president of the Academy after Max Liebermann's resignation. He has found a friend equally loyal to the Nazis in the composer Hans Pfitzner, and another representative composer, Richard Strauss, has joined them. It is true that the latter's works, viewed from the Nazi standpoint, would satisfy the wanton Jewish sensual appetites, but he is now on the way to becoming an official composer. Hardly a single one of the modern German composers remains with the Nazis. Arnold Schönberg has been driven out of his post at the Academy of Music. Whatever one thinks of his music, he has certainly had the most important influence on the development of modern music. In politics, a conservative, Schönberg was a formal revolutionary in music and found a new and original musical language. But Nazi Germany cannot use this pioneer. One of the best known German composers is Kurt Weill, whom Hitler's Germany has proscribed. He wrote the Dreigroschen opera, which achieved success throughout the world. But he is a Jew, and so he is now homeless. Franz Schreker, the best known of whose operas is Der Fernerklang, was ejected from the Association of the Academy of Music. He is by no means particularly progressive, but his origin is not above reproach. The special hate of the Nazis was directed against the first proletarian revolutionary composer, Hans Eisler, who has also been driven out of Germany. In recent years he has provided the German working class with choral pieces, Die Maßnahme, and popular fighting songs, which were sung in meetings and on the streets, and will soon become known in other countries. His music was consciously and consistently made for the working class. Hitler's Germany offered him either the drilling of the concentration camps or a martyr's death in some Nazi barracks. German music, which for some time has been in a general state of crisis, has now been deprived of its best forces. As a result of this action, the most famous conductor in the world, Arturo Toscanini, who works in Mussolini's Italy, has refused to take part in the Bayreuth Festival in connection with the anniversary of Richard Wagner. Early in June he sent the following telegram to Frau Winifred Wagner: "As events in Germany, which violate my feelings as an artist and as a man, in spite of my hopes show no change up to the present, I consider it to be my duty to break the silence which I have imposed on myself for the last 2 months, and to inform you that for my and your and everyone's peace of mind, it is better not to think any more of my coming to Bayreuth. With sentiments of unalterable friendship for the house of Wagner, Arturo Toscanini." Theater, painting, films. The chauvinistic glorification of Schlageter and the idealization of Horst Wessel now dominate the German stage. Herr Goebbels has had his well-known drama Der Wanderer presented at a Berlin theatre. All actors who had given proof of any artistic ability are no longer to be seen on the German stage. All state, municipal, and private theatres have been brought into conformity. The actors' associations have been brought under the control of fascist commissioners. Fritz Kortner, Max Pallenberg, Massery and Bergner, and the stage managers Max Reinhardt and Jessner have been driven out of Germany as un-German. The artistic abilities of the opera stars Lotte Schöne, Frieda Leider, Alexander Kipnis, among others, no longer count under the dictatorship of Rust's brown culture. The proletarian singer and actor Ernst Busch, a highly gifted artist, who popularized Eisler's proletarian songs and won a name for himself among the German workers, was hunted out of Germany. Jewish actors only to play in negative roles. The UFA Film Company issued instructions that in their future films Jewish actors were only to be used in negative roles, such as swindlers, criminals, and pathological cases. On June 6, the general meeting was held of the Union of Stage Directors, which has been incorporated in the National Socialists' League of Fighters for German Culture. The government commissioner Hinkel announced at this meeting that there would be a new cleansing campaign among professional actors. On the recommendation of the Prussian Ministry of Education to the head of the government, Göring, the formation of a Prussian Theatre Commission has been announced. The work of this commission, of which Hinkel will be chairman, will be to investigate the position of all stage managers, musical directors, conductors, and soloists connected with all municipal theatres. Decrees will shortly be issued to facilitate the annulment, extension, or alteration of agreements in order to ensure that no obstacles stand in the way of the artistic work which is essential in the German theatre. Legal measures will be taken to provide for the dissolution of private obligations where these are in conflict with the interests of the German theatre. Frankfurter Zeitung, June 8, 1933. The Nazi work of destruction is being carried on in every field of art. The president of the Academy of Arts, the painter Max Liebermann, a conservative in politics, was compelled to resign his post on the basis of the Aryan clause. It goes without saying that Kate Kollwitz, the gifted artist of working-class life, was banished by the Nazis. The number of painters and artists who have fallen victims to the German cleansing is legion. The best known and most progressive film directors have been forced to leave Germany to find employment. All film artists associated with the working-class movement and all proletarian or progressive films have been placed on the blacklist. The following are some of the films which were immediately prohibited by the Hitler government: Kühle Wampe, Niemandsland, Kameradschaft, Mutter Krause, Die andere Seite, Das Testament des Dr. Mabuse, Im Westen nichts Neues, Frühenglück, Frühennot, Hölzerne Kreuze, a French film. Soviet films banned included The Path to Life, Storm over Asia, Mother, Menschen Arsenal, 10 Days That Shook the World, The End of St. Petersburg. Woe to those who are suspected of too close connection with working-class films. An example of this is the imprisonment and maltreatment of Dr. A. Steigler by stormtroopers and auxiliary police. Steigler was director of a film company in Berlin, which, in the course of its work, rented Russian films. This was enough. The offices of the company were occupied by storm troops and police, and the whole staff was arrested. All films were confiscated, and the offices sealed up. The staff was taken to the Maikäfer barracks in Berlin, where, in the presence of his employees, Dr. Steigler was subjected to the most terrible maltreatment and torture. Storm troopers attacked him with their fists, clubs, and belts, and kicked him when he fell to the ground covered with blood. The schools of the Third Empire. They say that in your schools boys and girls fight together naked, and are thus trained as warriors and Amazons. But do they also learn anything? And are not their carnal desires excited when they see each other thus? Not at all, my friend, for we wear them out till they can no longer breathe, and when they are tired they can neither think nor feel carnal desire. But how then do they acquire the sciences and arts which they must have, O wise lawgiver? They must not learn and they must not think, for whoever can think may think evil thoughts, but whoever is made perfect physically, and made to toil the whole day long, is capable of becoming a useful citizen. From a discussion on Spartan education in Greece. The Weimar Constitution made possible some, though inadequate, new experiments in school organization. It enabled scholars, at least in the large towns, to pass through the public schools without religious instruction. It left undisturbed the educational privileges of the rich, but it did at least lead to some hesitating experiments in the admission of workers to the universities and in giving them special training for university work. Now the schools have once again been transformed, from top to bottom, into drilling grounds of the Christian religion. Experiments, such as that made by the Karl Marx Realgymnasium in Neukölln, the use of modern teaching methods, the subdivision of courses into a number of separate groups based on the special interests of the pupils, and the systematic preparation of workers for the universities, have been stopped and prohibited. In My Fight, Hitler outlined his program for the schools. It was much the same as that of the Spartan cynics cited above. The meaning of Hitler's program is that the schools of the Third Empire will not be expected to provide the children with knowledge and science, but to make them obedient to the leader. And Frick says in a less open form what Hitler says bluntly and without circumlocution. On May 9th, Frick laid down his program at a meeting of the ministers of education of the various states. He told them that up to now the whole system has been wrong, that children have been instructed, not educated. A fine distinction, but what is Frick aiming at? Today, we have more reason than ever to recall that, hand in hand with our kindred Germanic peoples of Northern Europe and their daughter states beyond the seas, we have to fulfill tasks throughout the world which will give the Nordic race a wide field of constructive cultural work. The kindred peoples here are not clearly defined. It would appear that Herr Frick hopes to unite them all against the sub-men in order to create a world-embracing Third Empire, which will show the inferior peoples of Latin or other races how things are managed in a real Hitler Empire. Together with the development of purely physical suppleness and ability, special emphasis must be laid on the formation of will power and the power to make decisions as the essential basis for the development of a sense of pleasure in taking responsibility, which lies at the root of character. Though expressed in involved language, this corresponds closely enough with the maxims laid down by the Spartan cynic. The schools are to produce uneducated, uninstructed, but well-drilled, dauntless soldiers of the Third Empire. In order to convince the children that nothing as good as the Third Empire exists in the world must be completely distorted as it is shown to them. Hence, history must be falsified and made National Socialist. The new history books must contain as little as possible. Considerable abridgment is indispensable. It is therefore sufficient to bring out the historical forces which have always been operative. The 2 last decades of our own age must be the main object of historical treatment. To make things plainer, Frick added that it would be particularly necessary to deal with the beginning of the awakening of the nation in the struggle for the Ruhr, up to the victory of the idea of National Socialist freedom and the restoration of the German nation at the Festival of Potsdam. In addition to this type of historical science, other subjects particularly insisted on for the schools are racial science and the elementary study of the basic conceptions of family research. The Bavarian Ministry of Education issued instructions containing the following passage. At the beginning of the school year 1933-34, apart from all other subjects and lessons, all classes in the state of Bavaria must arrange for history lessons in the first 4 to 6 weeks, covering the period 1918 to 1933. The remainder of the curriculum in this subject must be correspondingly shortened and allocated to the remaining months of the year. At the conclusion of this course, The last lesson must be organized as an ennobling celebration, with short addresses by the teacher and one of the pupils on the national awakening, the singing of patriotic songs, etc. This theme, the national awakening, which is most important for the reawakening of national sentiment among the Bavarian youth in the schools, is not only to be treated as a subject in the study of history, health science, etc., but must also be dealt with fundamentally as a principle of education. If examinations are to be held at the end of the year, special attention must be paid to this theme. The Government Commissioner in Berlin, Dr. Meinhausen, stated in a speech on the transformation of Berlin school life, which was published in the Völkischer Beobachter of May 6, 1933, that a halt must be put to all liberal sentimental dreams. In the Jewish question the principle must be sentimentality is high treason. In accordance with this, the Nazi Minister of Education has completely reshaped all pedagogical colleges and dismissed all teachers who were suspect. All secular schools are liquidated. Religious education is once again compulsory. The reintroduction of whipping was the first achievement of Brown school policy. All modern tendencies in the schools have been completely rooted out. The pupils in the top class at the unorganized Karl Marx school in Neukölln have all been put back 2 years. Before they are allowed to proceed with their studies, they have to be first drilled in the pure Nazi spirit. Jewish students as well as Jewish professors were driven out of the universities. Henceforward, only 1.5% of new entrants to the higher educational institutions may be non-Aryan. Instructions of the Prussian Ministry of Education, May 8, 1933. All teachers are compelled to join the National Socialist Teachers Union. This is a condition of employment. The following clauses are contained in the Act against the overcrowding and excessive proportion of persons of foreign race in the universities. 1. In all schools other than compulsory schools, the number of scholars and students is to be restricted so as to guarantee adequate education and to conform with the needs of the professions. 2. In accepting new entrants, care must be taken that the number of those of German nationality who are of non-Aryan origin within the meaning of the law for the restoration of a professional civil service of April 7, 1933, in relation to the total number of students in each institution and faculty, does not exceed the proportion of non-Aryans in the German population. This proportion is fixed for Germany as a whole as 1.5%. 7. The Act comes into force from its promulgation. Legal examinations simplified for Nazis. The Reich Commissioner for the Prussian Ministry of Justice, Kurl, issued instructions on April 5th that all candidates in legal examinations who have served the fatherland for a certain period in one of the recognized national associations may, at their request, be allowed a shortened form of examination by way of compensation for the time lost to their studies. Deutsche Allgemeine Zeitung, April 12, 1933. The spirit of the students who burn books. 1. Language and literature grow from the nation. 2. Today there is a contradiction between literature and the German nation. This is a shameful state of things. 3. Purity of language and literature depends on you. 4. Our most dangerous opponent is the Jew. 5. The Jew can only think Jewish. If he writes German, he is lying. The German who writes German and thinks Jewish is a traitor. 6. We mean to put an end to this lie. We mean to brand this treachery. 7. We mean to treat the Jew as a foreigner, and we mean to take the nation seriously. We therefore demand from the censorship the following. Jewish works must be published in Hebrew. If published in German, they must be described as translations. Only Germans have the right to write in German. The un-German spirit must be eradicated from public libraries. The German Student Organization, from the 12 Theses against the un-German spirit, posted in Berlin University on April 13, 1933. Bringing the press into conformity. On the evening of January 30th, 1933, the day when the Hitler-Hugenberg government was formed, the new minister, Frick, summoned the representatives of the Berlin press to a conference, at which he promised that the new government would be distinguished from its forerunners by its maintenance of the freedom of the press. A few days after the word of a German man had been given, a wave of prohibitions of the Communist and Social Democratic press swept through Germany. By the middle of February, practically the whole of the German Communist press had been closed down. Prohibitions of Social Democratic and Democratic papers descended like hail. In the course of the Reichstag election campaign, storm troops went into the printing offices of the center newspapers in the Rhineland, compelled them to print the speeches of National Socialist ministers, and, with the support of the police authorities, exercised a rigid censorship over what was to appear. In the course of the last few days before the burning of the Reichstag, Frick's freedom of the press had been almost completely crushed out by the storm troops and police. The destruction of working-class printing works and newspaper offices was only prevented by defensive guards. When the Nazis succeeded in bringing off their monstrous act of provocation in the Reichstag, and the Brown Terror began to rage, the last remaining of the Communist and Social Democratic papers were wiped out. Communist, Social Democratic, and bourgeois journalists of left tendencies were cast into prison or delivered over to sadistic tortures in Nazi barracks. The democratic bourgeois press and the center newspapers began to be brought into conformity with the new pogrom regime. The democratic publishing houses of Ullstein and Mosse and the liberal press throughout Germany began the voluntary removal of Jewish, pacifist, or other members of their editorial staffs who were not liked by the Nazis. And this press, too, celebrated the fateful events of these days and declared in support of the awakening of the nation for Hitler. It suppressed the reports of the massacres in the working-class quarters. It suppressed the acts of brutality which were taking place daily only a few minutes away from the editorial offices. The Jewish papers denied the persecution of the Jews. The foreign press, which was not so accommodating in the matter of suppressing the inhuman cruelties which were taking place, soon came into conflict with the Hitler government. On March 7th an official government communiqué was issued. In view of the malicious reports in the foreign press as to what is taking place in Germany, serious measures against a number of foreign correspondents are in preparation. Some of the correspondents concerned have escaped the hands of the police by leaving the country. As far as the other correspondents are concerned, they will have to guarantee that in the future they will avoid any malicious tendencies in their reports and any ambiguous statements. In consideration of this, the correspondents in question have not been expelled for the time being. They have been granted a probationary period of 2 months. On April 5th, the Hitler government suffered a defeat at the hands of the Foreign Press Association. It had threatened the association with a boycott if it did not remove its president, Maurer, correspondent of the Chicago Daily News. The general meeting of the association decided by 60 votes to 7, with 3 abstentions, not to accept Maurer's resignation. In the course of the following weeks, public opinion abroad compelled the Hitler government to make further retreats in its dealings with the foreign press correspondents in Germany. The German Press Association was brought into conformity by the appointment of the Nazi press chief Dietrich as president. Similar measures were applied to the German Newspaper Proprietors Association and the Association of Publishers of Periodicals. All district organizations of publishers and journalists were brought into conformity. The German Press Association, under its new president, decided that in future no Jewish or Marxist journalists would be admitted to membership. The Germanizing of its editorial staff and its humble submission to Hitlerite policy was not of much avail to the Rudolf Mosse Publishing Company, which owns the Berliner Tageblatt. Early in April, the company was virtually expropriated and taken over by a newly formed company controlled by a Nazi commissioner. A new editorial staff, which could furnish the necessary guarantees of loyalty to Hitler, was appointed. Another example of the many cases in which non-working class papers have been brought into conformity is that of the Dortmunder General Anzeiger, which was voluntarily transformed into an organ of the National Socialist Party. This paper has the largest printing works in Europe and the biggest circulation of all German newspapers outside of Berlin. As its circulation was mainly in the thickly populated industrial areas of the Rhine and Westphalia, its contents made some concessions to the anti-capitalist and anti-fascist feelings of the workers there. On the formation of the Hitler government, the former editorial staff was dismissed, to enable the paper to be brought voluntarily into conformity along the usual lines. But this did not satisfy the Brown rulers. In the issue of April 20th, among various hymns of praise for the occasion of Hitler's birthday, there appeared a drawing of Hitler, which the Nazi leaders declared was a caricature. They therefore seized the issue and closed the offices of the paper. The Dortmund police president entrusted the editor of the Nazi journal Red Earth with the management of the printing works. The Nazis then threatened the proprietor with the permanent prohibition of the Dortmunder General Anzeiger, on which the proprietor declared his readiness to transform the paper into an official Nazi organ. And thus the Nazis conquered this great printing establishment. It is not possible to enumerate all the prohibitions and warnings which have been directed against bourgeois papers and periodicals. The campaign of bringing into conformity led to a dictatorial transformation of the whole of the German press services. Readers of the newspapers which still appear in Germany are hermetically sealed off from all reliable foreign news. Over 250 foreign newspapers are forbidden in Germany, from the following countries: United States 9, Argentina 2, Belgium 7, Canada 2, Danzig 3, Great Britain 5, France 31, Holland 9, Lithuania 2, Latvia 1, Luxembourg 5, Austria 37, Poland 24, Romania 1, Czar Territory 4, Sweden 1, Switzerland 26, Soviet Union 9, Spain 2, Czechoslovakia 66. Germany was the country which had the greatest literary output. The following announcement is significant of the fall in production during the first few weeks of the Hitler regime. According to the Frankfurter Zeitung of April 15, 1933, in the course of the National Revolution, production in paper mills sank in many cases to 25%. The Deutsche Allgemeine Zeitung of April 22 reports that the publishing output in the first quarter of 1933 was 30% lower than in the same quarter of 1931. The export trade continues to register a decline. The German book trade has been deprived of its best customers and of a whole range of science and literature. End of Chapter 6, Part 2.
Chapter 7 of Brown Book of the Hitler Terror. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Brown Book of the Hitler Terror by Lord Marley. Chapter 7. Brutality and Torture. Part 1. The National Socialist German Labour Party, which for years has been maintained by the German Kaisers of Industry and Agriculture, has studied history to guide it in playing its part in the period of social decline. It learnt arson from Nero, the persecution of the Jews from the Middle Ages, the murder of socialists from Mussolini. For many years the official documents of the National Socialist Party have been proclaiming the coming of a St. Bartholomew's Night. The official description has been the Night of the Long Knife. This night began with the burning of the Reichstag, and it is not yet over. The workers and peasants have shown too much resistance. Too many millions have rallied behind the banner of freedom. The National Socialist Labour Party has had to turn the St. Bartholomew's Night into a St. Bartholomew's Year, and it is the first quarter of this year which is covered in the following report. The friends of the Hitler government are always ready to repeat the government's declaration that peace and order reign in Germany. Dementists are issued to calm feeling outside of Germany, and festivals and parades are staged to distract attention from what is actually taking place. The few foreign tourists who still care to visit Germany under the present tyranny are not taken into storm troop barracks or into concentration camps. It is only by chance that the foreign visitor may be an eyewitness of the nightly tortures, shootings while trying to escape, and secretly organized murders. Every message from foreign journalists to their newspapers, every telephone conversation, every visit they make is carefully noted, and they are threatened with immediate expulsion. And when the cries of tortured victims in the cellars of storm troop barracks reach the ears of neighbors, when the wife of some tortured prisoner speaks out, when the brutality of the Nazis is actually seen by hundreds of witnesses, then the official explanation is given that this is an exceptional case. But in Essen, on March 7th, 1933, Minister Goering officially proclaimed to the applauding howls of a great mass meeting that when wood is being planed, there are always shavings. In reply, it must be stated that these shavings have been organized for many years, that the methods of the Middle Ages now employed by the Nazis have been worked out and advocated for years by the National Socialist leaders. It is the National Socialist leaders who have organized the pogroms and lynchings, the burnings and the pillories, the tortures of the first, second, and third degrees. The methods of the Middle Ages have been employed publicly insofar as they were effective for propaganda. But the tortures have been carried out in private, in the darkness of the night. Even now, millions of Germans are ignorant of them. The terror by night. The secret terror has raged continuously since February 27, 1933. There is a general settlement of accounts. Arrests are made systematically, tortures carefully arranged. And the ministerial reply to scruples about torturing is to lay down how far these tortures can go. So long as I do not see any communists running around with their ears and noses cut off, there is no reason to get excited. Tortures up to this point are therefore authorized. There is no need to examine the victims too closely or to investigate the denunciations. The Nazis in their arrests can follow the instructions of the French cardinal who told the faithful of the original St. Bartholomew's Night, "Kill them all. God will be able to pick out his Christians." Every day we are being visited by new victims of these tortures by night, who show us their still open wounds. We print below declarations made on oath and reports which we have investigated with the utmost care. The torture chambers. One report makes it clear that the Nazis have established a regular tariff for beating prisoners. Simple membership of the Social Democratic Party is punished with 30 blows with a rubber truncheon on the naked body. Membership of the Communist Party is usually punished with 40 blows. The penalty is increased when the prisoner has been an official of a political party or trade union. The punishment is to be modified in accordance with the conduct of the prisoner. One prisoner, Bernstein, was given 50 lashes because he was a communist, and then a further 50 lashes because he was also a Jew. There are therefore several degrees of torture, a fact which is brought out in the various declarations which are in our possession. The torture begins from the moment when the victim is fetched from his home. The person who opens the door is threatened with revolvers, the members of the family are threatened, furniture and books are destroyed or thrown out into the street. Authors' manuscripts, the fruit of many months of work, are destroyed. In the case of workers, whatever remains of their wages is confiscated. The family is made to witness the proceedings. The children see their father struck in his face by unknown young men. The wife sees her husband's face streaming with blood. She asks what they are going to do with him. She gets only an insult in reply. Then the prisoner is kicked out of the room and down the steps to the car which is waiting for him. One report states that after an arrest has been made, the Nazis begin to beat their prisoner on the way down the stairs. The leader of the storm troop suddenly ordered them to stop beating the prisoner, who then saw that people in the house opposite had been roused. The storm troopers are disciplined in public. But from the moment when the prisoner enters the Nazi barracks, he is as much an outlaw as the Nazi leaders have been threatening for years to make him. Any Nazi who meets the prisoner on the stairs or in the passages kicks or strikes him. Cowards have become murderers. Day after day they wait outside the doors of the rooms where the first degree of torture is applied, and make the prisoners run the gauntlet of whips and boots and rubber truncheons. Then the prisoner is admitted to the presence of the storm troop leader or higher officer, and the trial begins. The court. The judge sits behind a table. 3 stars on his storm troop uniform give him judicial powers over all prisoners. Daggers and bayonets are stuck into the table, and there are flickering candles at each end. The prisoner is pushed forward to the table. Nazis press closely round him. When he answers, they hit him. If he declares his innocence, they kick him. Any attempt to defend himself is useless. There is no question of what the truth is. The trial is only a farce to provide a pretext for making another martyr. The prisoner hears the source of the denunciation which was the cause of his arrest, and thinks that he can at once disprove the charge. He begins to say something, and then blows are rained down upon him, and he is told not to speak unless he is asked a question. They ask him for addresses. They think that they will be able to make capital of the story, that the leaders of the workers' movement have betrayed each other. But the prisoner refuses to say anything. Then the rubber truncheons are used again with furious rage. It is to the eternal honor of the German working class movement that thousands of workers have not flinched, in spite of all the brutality and torture inflicted on them. They have refused to give new victims to their torturers. The cellars. From the court, the prisoners are taken to the cellars, where they can see in the semi-darkness the flogging benches standing ready. The air is thick with the smell of dried blood and sweat. The prisoner is thrown on to the flogging bench, and steel rods hammer down on his back. 4 of the Nazis do the beating. Each new blow cuts the raw flesh to pieces. Then they get tired and push him into the next cellar, where he is no longer alone. Fellow victims are cowering in the corners. The worst mutilated victims are writhing on straw sacks on the ground. Some have lost control and are crying out. From the next room come the cries of the next victim. The prisoners in the adjoining room can now see everything, as someone has thought it right to leave the doors open. The next victim starts up at the first blow from the steel rods. His face is pale. A new command makes him bow down again. His movement was criminal, and the punishment was made more severe. He was forced to count the blows in a loud voice, till the numbers could no longer be distinguished from his cries of pain. The half-unconscious prisoner is then pulled from the flogging bench, and the storm troop leader walks forward and announces to the victim, "Now you will be shot." The prisoner is placed with his face to the wall. There is silence, broken only by the Nazis releasing the safety catches of their revolvers. Then shots. The prisoner hears the whiz of bullets past his ears, and begins to realize that they are not hitting him. At last he sinks in a swoon, and before he loses consciousness he hears the Nazis laughing. We have many reports of similar treatment and give the following as typical. I live in the Judenstrasse near number 50, where a storm troop detachment was quartered. On March 19th, the arbitrary arrests I previously reported were resumed. About 9 p.m., shortly after another prisoner had been taken in, the neighbors heard a shot through the open window of the Nazi office. I was determined to see what was happening, and discovered that there was a man, presumably the prisoner, standing doubled up against the window. Then more shots rang out, but the bullets did not hit the man. Then I saw him fall to the ground, and Nazis bent down over him, laughing. One voice shouted several times, "Now then, get up, go home." The prisoner seemed not to hear this shout, and he fainted with fear. Is it strange that one should hear of men being driven mad by this? Hundreds of prisoners have been through this. They have been dragged from the torture chambers and thrown into the waiting room among their comrades. At the last moment, before they sink down exhausted on their straw sacks, they are told that they are to be shot the following morning. They are in such pain that they are indifferent to the new threat. But when they come to themselves some time afterwards, they begin to think about it. They have no reason to doubt that the threat will be carried out, so they sit there among their groaning friends, waiting for their last morning to come. During the night, the guard leans against the door and sings, "Dawn, dawn, you light my way to early death." A report from the Hedemannstrasse barracks in Berlin gives this detail. Sworn declarations repeatedly show that in many cases the prisoners have been left for days with this threat hanging over them. They hear the beatings beginning again in the adjoining room. The doors are kicked open so that they can see the tortures. From time to time, one of the victims is called out and tried again. The Nazis delight in filth. A new prisoner, who looks like an intellectual, is pushed into the torture chamber. The Nazis hold his head, force his teeth apart, and then pour a bottle of castor oil down his throat. Then they ask him politely to take down his trousers. He unbuttons his braces and his trousers drop. The Nazis do not put him on the flogging bench. They make him stand doubled up. The Nazis wait a quarter of an hour. Then they pick up the steel rods and begin to beat him. He screams and stands upright. The Nazis press him down and beat him again. Then suddenly his bowels empty. The Nazi leaders will deny these loathsome cruelties, but our archives show that these statements are true, and we have not only the declarations made by intellectuals and workers who have experienced this, but there is also in our possession a report of a confidential meeting of Nazis in Berlin at which Dr. Goebbels, the Minister for Enlightenment, explained how he would deal with editors who happened to have different opinions from his. The protective corpsmen must go to the offices of the paper concerned and give each member of the editorial staff a liter of castor oil. The Nazis, therefore, only act in accordance with instructions. The Red Cross in Nazi cellars. The Nazi doctors, as a rule, are only present at the actual torturing. They are not to render any medical aid, but only to determine whether the prisoner may still be beaten. They are like the doctors of the Inquisition. The torture is stopped when there is danger of the victim dying. All reports show that medical aid is only given when the victim appears to be dying. Injections are only made at the last minute. The victims are only carried away to the hospital when the medical expert certifies that they are dying. Propaganda to justify the terror. For years, the National Socialist leaders had been preparing the ground for the terror by systematic propaganda. This was directed in the first place against the November criminals, the revolutionaries of November 1918, who were represented as having been responsible for all the sufferings of Germany since 1918. Intensive propaganda was also directed against the Soviet Union. In My Fight, Hitler wrote, It must never be forgotten that the rulers of present-day Russia are blood-stained common criminals, the scum of humanity. And on March 10th, 1933, German wireless stations broadcast a Horst Wessel play in which Hitler's lies about the Soviet Union were repeated, that since 1917 2 million people had been murdered in Russia, that the Soviets are the embodiment of lies and deceit, looting and robbery. Then there was the systematic propaganda against the hereditary foe, France. Hatred of France was carefully nurtured, and the idea of revenge developed. The propaganda against the Jews is dealt with in another chapter. One example shows its effect in the brutalities shown to Jewish victims of the terror. A doctor was beaten up in Nazi barracks and was lying seriously injured and covered with blood on the straw. Someone who came into the room called attention to how serious the doctor's condition was. This made the Nazi guard furious with indignation, and from his excited statements it was possible to gather that his section leader had told the men the following legend: "All doctors who are Jews have for years been taking revenge on German women, who come under their care in hospitals by secretly cutting out their ovaries, so that only Jewish women could bear children, and thus the Jews would rule Germany." The Nazi guard followed up this story by kicking the severely injured man in the stomach. The blood guilt of the Nazi leaders. The responsibility of the Nazi leaders not only for the methods of their organized gangs, but for the murderous feelings among their followers is made clear from statements made by the leaders both before and after their seizure of power. The present Minister of the Interior, Frick, declared that it is not a bad thing if a few tens of thousands of Marxist functionaries come to harm. Stohr, the former vice president of the Reichstag, told a mass meeting, "We will make the hemp industry prosper." Immediately after the new cabinet of Oldenburg was formed, the premier, Rover, announced, "We will put the Marxists and the people of the center on the gallows to feed the ravens." On March 10th, 1933, Minister Goering spoke at a mass meeting in Essen. "I would rather shoot a few times too short and too wide, but at any rate I would shoot." Goering's words fell on fruitful soil. At the end of April, the police president of Dortmund issued an instruction: "In the last few days many communist leaflets have been distributed. I order the police to make immediate use of their weapons against any attempt to distribute communist leaflets." The terror was organized. 1. On the night of the burning of the Reichstag, 30 Nazi barracks were prepared for carrying out tortures in Berlin alone. Steel rods, whips, chains, cords for tying up prisoners, water pails, and castor oil were bought and taken to the barracks. The same night they were used. Doctors were allocated to each barracks. 2. We are in possession of reports from a number of German towns showing that on the same evening the Nazis were fully mobilized, and guards were put round houses where working-class leaders lived, as well as at railway stations and post offices. 3. A similar selection of victims was made in all towns. 4. The arrests were almost everywhere left to the storm troops and their special detachments. The police merely accompanied them, as the Nazis were not at that time quite sure of their attitude. 5. The enrollment of stormtroopers as auxiliary police began on February 22nd. This is a definite indication that action on a large scale was contemplated, and that it was proposed to keep the appearance of legality as long as possible. 6. In his capacity as Commissioner for Prussia, Goering, officially by an order issued on February 17th, authorized shooting without any form of trial. Every man who in pursuance of this duty makes use of his weapons will be protected by me regardless of the consequence of his action. On the other hand, Every man who from any false scruples does not use his weapons can anticipate criminal proceedings against himself. Every officer must at all times remember that omission to take the necessary measures is more serious than a mistake made in applying such measures. 7. High officials of the National Socialist Party have constantly been present in the torture cellars of the Hedemannstrasse in Berlin and in other barracks. They directed the acts of brutality and conducted trials. We have definite evidence, for example, that Count Helldorf, leader of the Nazi storm troops, who was and remains in daily communication with Goering and Hitler, held parades of the victims of the brutalities. Our documents. We have in our archives 536 declarations made by persons who had been severely ill-treated. The statements have been checked and found to be correct. 137 certificates show that the victims have received serious permanent injuries. 375 declarations mention that the victims, before being allowed to leave the torture houses, were forced to sign statements that they had been well treated. Our material from the towns and villages of the Third Empire supports the conclusion that since February 27th, about 60,000 people have been subjected to violence. An unemployed worker. On Monday, March 6th, 5 p.m., 2 stormtroopers and a leader came to the door of the flat occupied by the Reichstag deputy X and demanded admittance. I was in the flat sorting out the washing. I opened the door, at first on the chain. A revolver was thrust through the opening, and I was ordered to open the door immediately. I was asked where X was living, but could give no information. Then they took me off with them. They took me in a sidecar to the Botcherstrasse. There they began to ill-use me. I still have, at the time of writing this, the marks of what they did to me, both eyes beaten blue, a bite on my left temple, my hands still swollen and scratched. They called me a young murderer, and similar names, without the slightest ground. Then they made me wash off the blood, which was streaming from my forehead, mouth, and nose. I had hardly washed it off when I was taken into the front room, and again they started beating me. I covered my face with my hands, or they would certainly have broken my jaws. But that did not satisfy them. Together with 2 other prisoners, I was taken in a taxi to the Hedemannstrasse with 2 motorcyclists as escort. I was told I should be thankful that they were so humane, as they worked differently in the lower groups. I nearly had to laugh when they told me this. At the Hedemannstrasse I stated when they examined me that I had been begging and had always got something at the door where X lived. Because of this I had gone there many times, also to talk politics, and eventually Frau X gave me some housework to do, beating carpets and so on. I told the Nazis that I had been very glad to get such treatment from communists. I told them that I was a communist sympathizer and had voted for List 3. Then the man in charge said, "We can always do with people who tell the truth. It is not you we want, it is your leaders we want to destroy and settle accounts with." But workers are brutally beaten. On the evening of March 5th, I was with 6 other workers in a public house in Berlin North. We were waiting to hear the election results. A group of uniformed storm troop men came in, pointed their revolvers at us, and made us go with them, with our hands above our heads, to the storm troop quarters in the X-Strasse. There we were beaten up as communist sows. Then we were put into a car and taken to the Nazi headquarters in Hedemannstrasse. We were chased up to the 4th floor, and driven along a corridor with repeated blows and lashes with riding whips. The corridor was decorated from top to bottom with conquered Social Democratic banners and posters. There was a figure against the wall which was supposed to represent Ernst Thälmann in the uniform of the Red Front, hanging on gallows. We were driven with blows into a general room. We were forced to go down on our knees and shout Heil Hitler, also to say the Our Father and sing the Horst Wessel song. Anyone who did not obey instantaneously was beaten till he was unconscious. Later we were placed against the wall of the room, and continuous volleys were fired close above our heads. After they had left us alone for a little while, we were put through the first interrogation. Each of us was summoned alone into a room where there were about 6 Nazis with riding whips. We had to strip, and were then told that we should be beaten until we told everything. They demanded that we should confess the most impossible things. We were asked to give the names and addresses of communist officials, and to reveal imaginary hiding places of arms and duplicating machines. During the interrogation we were beaten the whole time. Then we were given half an hour to think things over, and then the torture began again. Some anti-fascists who had formerly belonged to the Nazis had their heads shaved, except for a forelock, which was tied together. We were told that these people were to be shot next morning. When we arrived, they were lying unconscious on the floor of the general room. Besides ourselves, there were about 50 other Communist and Social Democrat workers in the room. When we were released, a document was put in front of us stating that we had left the building without any injury to our health. We signed. I found 2 of those who had been with me some time after in the Am Friedrichshain hospital. One of them had a bullet wound in the neck. Other typical cases. J.M., a worker living in the Wiedestrasse, Berlin, was taken away by storm-troop men during the night of March 27th to 28th and severely ill-treated in the Nazi barracks in the Rotewerstrasse. His whole body is covered with open wounds. R., a worker living in Schönberg, who was known to do political work, was found in his flat and there severely injured with steel rods, then being taken to a Nazi barracks. At the time when this report was being written, it was not yet known what had become of him. His flat was completely smashed up by the Nazis when they came to arrest him. Max F., a worker in West Brandenburg, was attacked during the night by about 40 armed storm-troop men. The door of his flat was broken in and they started shooting wildly into the flat. He was hit in the back, but managed to jump through a window and escape. As he ran, he was hit again in the arm, and another shot grazed his body. He got away and was taken in by a hospital. It had to be kept secret that he was in the hospital. Every day his relatives were threatened. Paul Paprocki, a worker of 36 years of age, living in number 23 Malplakstrasse, was taken from his room at 3 a.m. on the night of March 26th to 27th. A strong detachment of storm-troop men took him to their headquarters in the Utrechtstrasse. When he refused to give any addresses, they began to ill-use him. Some hours later, he was released with serious injuries from blows. The 18-year-old worker Kurt Hackenbusch, Gruntallerstrasse 63, was arrested with 3 of his friends on March 26th and taken to the Nazi quarters in the Prinzenstrasse. There they were beaten with heavy leather straps. The prisoners refused to say Our Father. Further beating. Some hours later the prisoners were taken to an accident station, where they were forced by threats to state that the Nazis had rescued them from an attack. In addition to cuts in his face and back, Hackenbusch has a severe wound on his head. Jacob Ickler, a worker living in Kassel, Kettengasse 4, 20 years old, was carried off on March 20th, 1933 by Nazis who searched his father's flat. He was taken to the town hall, laid on a flogging bench, and then beaten with rubber truncheons. Some blows struck the lower half of his face and his temples. His back and upper legs were streaming with blood. A doctor's certificate testifies to the condition in which he was found. The doctor's name is not given here, as in Germany of the Third Empire it is no longer safe to give medical attention to a man who has been injured. Urine for thirst. Wilhelm Sollmann, a Social Democratic member of the Reichstag and a former minister of the Reich, writes as under of his ill usage at the hands of storm troop and protective corpsmen, On Thursday, March 9th, shortly after 3 o'clock in the afternoon, 3 cars filled with stormtroop and protective corpsmen pulled up at my house. As at the moment I was speaking on the telephone to a member of the town council, I was able to tell him, "Nazis are forcing their way in. Give the mobile police the alarm." At that moment a number of men armed with loaded revolvers, sticks, and knives forced their way into my study. Before I could say a word, I was struck down at my desk. The men were in a kind of frenzy of hate and joy at being able to take revenge on me. Most of the men went to the other rooms in the house and in a few minutes literally smashed everything to splinters. I was hit and thrown into an open car. My wife called out, "Where are you taking my husband?" One of them answered jeeringly, "You will soon know that." First they drove me over the grass towards the wood, as there was a stormtroop man sitting in front of me and flourishing a revolver the whole time. I thought that they were going to shoot me in the nearest wood, but they drove on, abusing me all the time. Some of the abuse was quite insane, and then we crossed the bridge near Kalk. There they drove slowly, and all along the high street, which was full of people, I was exhibited to the crowd. "This is the great Solomon. See how small he is." I was taken to the district headquarters of the National Socialists in the Mozartstrasse. I was chased up the stairs with blows and kicks and lashes, and then into the conference room. They had lowered the blinds so that the room was half in darkness. I was to be put before the tribunal. A large swastika banner was spread over the table. I saw that my colleague, Efferoth, was sitting near the window, in the same plight as myself. I had hardly taken a seat near him when the tortures began, and they went on for 2 hours. First, a man in storm-troop uniform, whom my colleague said was Councillor Abele, made a short speech attacking Efferoth, saying that retribution was now to come. Then protective corpsmen began attacking us with their fists. For about half an hour Efferoth and I lay on the floor, so exhausted that we could not get up. All the time we were being hit and kicked, and now and then our hair was pulled and our heads knocked together. Eventually we were pulled up and forced into chairs. A man held our hands behind the chair, while another forced us to open our teeth, and poured a quarter of a liter of castor oil down our throats. One of our tormentors shouted for salts to increase our torture, but apparently salts could not be got quickly enough. Then they gave us a short rest again. I begged for a glass of water. When it was given to me, I saw its color and therefore only used it to pour over my hands, which were covered with blood. One of the men shouted, "Why don't you drink the water?" At the same moment he threw the glass with what was left of its contents into my face. Then we were struck and kicked again. All at once our tormentors seemed to get uneasy. I thought that the police must have been notified of our being attacked and carried off. About 5 o'clock the protective corpsmen took hold of us and with a shout of "Into the coal cellar!" literally flung us down the stairs. Apparently the coal cellar was locked, and they seemed to be in a hurry to get rid of us. They therefore pushed us across the street with blows and kicks, our faces were already a bloody pulp, to a motor, where we were made to squat on the floor. The ill treatment was carried on in the closed motor. One blow struck me in the right eye. We pulled up at police headquarters. Although we were in a state of collapse, we were forced to run in and up the stairs. One of the Nazis said that next day we would have to walk in front of the Nazis' torchlight procession, and at the finish we would be thrown on the heap of torches. The president of the police advised us to let ourselves be put under protective arrest. I referred to my parliamentary immunity. He agreed with what I had said, but nevertheless advised that Efferoth and I should go into the prison hospital. In the hospital we were sewn up and bandaged. During the torturing, one of the protective corpsmen had slowly and deliberately pressed a knife into Efferoth's side. The doctor stated that it would have been dangerous if it had gone a centimeter deeper. Next day the press published a report that we had been attacked by political opponents and suffered slight injuries. End of Chapter 7, Part 1. Chapter 7 of Brown Book of the Hitler Terror, This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Brown Book of the Hitler Terror by Lord Marley. Chapter 7. Brutality and Torture, Part 2. A Doctor and His Wife Tortured. On June 3rd, at 4 in the morning, there was a ring at the door of the flat. A number of men shouted, "Police, open the door." My wife replied, "Please come in the morning. I don't open the door at night." Then there were heavy blows against the door. It was broken in, and 5 men in storm troop uniform, without police badges, forced their way into the flat, holding revolvers out at us. I asked what they wanted, and they replied with a shower of blows with their fists and rubber truncheons. "Hold your mouth. Who asked you to speak?" They ordered, "Hands up." Some of them seized my throat and pressed me against the wall. "It's all up with you Jews, you Bolshevik rabble." When I tried to say something, they struck me again. They searched the flat, smashed in the drawers of my desk, filled a trunk with books, manuscripts, and letters, and ordered me to get out of it. My wife, who did not want to leave me in the hands of these bandits, came with me, although she was told not to. They kicked me down the steps. When my wife protested against their treating a sick man like that, she was cursed and pushed off the seat of the car. "You impudent sow, keep quiet or you'll get it too." The car pulled up at a house, in front of which there was a group of storm troop and protective corpsmen. As soon as we got out of the car, we were driven along with rubber truncheons and dog whips, and up the stairs to the 4th floor. I was hardly able to climb up, as I had influenza and my heart was weak, so they beat me furiously until I reached the top. I was pushed into a corridor, and my wife and I were made to run the gauntlet through Nazis, who struck at us as we passed. I was then taken to a separate room. I stated that there must be some mistake, and asked to be allowed to clear it up. The prisoner, who had worked at a Berlin hospital for 7 years, and had since been chief doctor in a section of the municipal hospital in Neukölln, learnt in the course of a long interrogation that the absurd charge was made against him that he was the head of the communist propaganda activities in the Reich. When he protested his innocence, he was beaten. He continues his report. "They threw themselves on me with bestial fury, using rubber truncheons, leather whips, and steel rods. They hit particularly at my head, jumping up on tables and chairs and hitting mercilessly at me from above my head. My face was streaming with blood. My cries for help soon stopped. A few blows with an iron rod, and I doubled up and fell unconscious." The victim further reports that he was soon in a condition in which he might die at any moment, and the Nazis felt compelled to summon medical aid. He was able, however, to keep track of what was happening, and his account includes the following. "There were young men sitting in the room. Their faces were pale, and many had bandages around their heads. They were waiting to be interrogated. Now and then Nazis would come into the room and insist on all the prisoners jumping up and greeting them with Heil Hitler. Those who did not obey the order promptly enough were lashed with whips and forced to stand up and sit down again. They had to do this 10 or more times in quick succession. Storm troop men came in and took revolvers and ammunition from the drawers of the desk. The drawers were full of revolvers, and each Nazi selected the one he liked best. Other Nazis came in looking for the list of volunteers for Austria. A man who had sworn at a storm troop man some days before was pulled out of his bed that night and arrested. A woman who had said that a man who had gone over from the Communists to the Nazis was mad was arrested at her flat and brought to the Nazi headquarters. All at once someone shouted, "Peek and Olstein have been arrested and will be brought here." The storm troop men raved with delight and swung their rubber truncheons round them. "Let them come." Someone said that the worker Schulze had come. All the Nazis went out of the room. For a quarter of an hour I heard them raging out in the corridor. Then a short man about 30 years of age was pushed into the room. His right eye was full of blood. In the interrogation he admitted that he was a member of the Red Aid. He was accused of having been present when a storm troop man was murdered. He denied this. He said that he had already been arrested on suspicion of this charge and then set free again. He was beaten with dog whips and ordered to answer yes to every question put to him. He was beaten until he answered yes. "Are you a murderer, you scoundrel?" He answered no. He was then beaten harder. His whole face was covered with blood. He wiped his face with his sleeve. "You've admitted it now." He replied, "It was you who compelled me to say it." They beat him again. He was asked how many children he had brought into the world, and with how many women he had slept, and whether all his children were such idiots as he was. Then he was sent into the kitchen to have his head shaved. When he came back, he was pushed in front of a fragile old man, a clergyman from Lichterfelde. The white-haired old gentleman was told to hold out his hand to him and say, "Good day, comrade." The old man held out his hand and said, "I shake your hand. You are a suffering human being." They all laughed. "That's how you greet a murderer?" The old man answered, "And even if he is a man who has been tortured, and you are the embodiment of force, and force is not eternal. You cannot break my convictions with rubber truncheons. You are national, and I am international." This courageous act of the white-haired old man made some of the Nazis look abashed, and when some of them rushed at him, the others held them back. After midnight I was taken to the interrogation room, where I saw my wife, who was as pale as a ghost. She whispered to me, "I can't bear it any longer. I must throw myself out the window. They are going to say that you are a spy of the Cheka and shoot you. Don't do anything stupid. Pull yourself together." This exchange of words was enough to rouse the Nazi in charge to fury. He was so tired, or drunk, that he could hardly sit up. My wife was led away. My condition grew worse, and I asked for a doctor. I was taken to the room of the officer in charge, and my wife was allowed to give me something to drink. In spite of the victim's critical condition, the storm troop detachment was determined to force the doctor to confess. The man pulled out his revolver and yelled, "3 bullets, 1 in your forehead, 1 in your mouth, 1 in your stomach, and then it's all over and you'll be thrown on the dung heap." I lay silent and quite still. He raised his fist and struck me in the face. "In a couple of minutes it will be all over with you. I'll hang you from the window. I've hanged people in Kiev like that. Only a few minutes more. When I leave the room it will be too late. Whether you say it or not, you miserable scoundrel. What is the Cheka doing? What is the Ogpu doing? Are you going to talk or not?" I lay still, and he kicked me in the stomach as hard as he could. I lost consciousness. A doctor decoyed into a trap. Although every victim of the Nazis deserves equal mention, we must quote the case of another doctor on account of its special features. The following report is taken from the Saarbrück Arbeiterstimme. On March 17th there was a regular meeting of the Berlin Medical Association. After the lecture, the chairman, Professor Goldscheider, head of the university clinic, a man 70 years of age, asked his colleagues to remain for a few minutes, as he wanted to show them a particularly interesting case. Then a patient completely swathed in bandages was brought in, and Professor Goldscheider explained, "Gentlemen, this patient is our colleague Dr. Lust. The day before yesterday he received a telephone call in the evening summoning him to a patient in Lichterfelde. When he reached there he was met by storm troop men and ill-treated in this terrible way." These words caused great indignation at the meeting. The well-known Professor Sauerbruch, a German nationalist, jumped up and declared that he was prepared to take the victim of the Nazis into his clinic. As a result of this experience, something like a panic had spread through Berlin doctors, many of whom fear that when they are called to a patient, they may meet a similar terrible fate. A woman, 46 years old, whipped. During the night of Monday, March 20th, Tuesday, March 21st, the Social Democratic woman councillor Maria Jankowski was attacked in her flat, Bergmannstrasse 18, Köpenick, Berlin. A laundry van pulled up in front of the house. 20 storm troop men broke in the house door and occupied the stairs. 6 men forced their way into her flat with revolvers ready. Frau Jankowski was taken in the van with 2 communist officials who were already in it to the transport headquarters of the Nazis in Köpenick. In a shed in the courtyard, she was forced to take off her clothes and lie on a wooden bench, which was covered with a black, red, gold flag. 4 men held her down, one pressing her face into a bundle of old rags. For 2 hours this woman, 46 years old, was beaten mercilessly with truncheons, steel rods, and whips. After this torture, Frau Jankowski was put into the street. At about 5 in the morning, some passers-by found her and took her home in a taxi. The doctor certified that her condition was dangerous. 1 kidney had been broken by blows. There was literally not a sound spot left on her body. In the Antonius Hospital in Karlhorst, Frau Jankowski made the following deposition. While I was being beaten, I was told again and again to give the names and addresses of workers. They made me count the colors of the Republic and say foul words instead of black, red, gold. They asked me questions like, "Have you had any money from the welfare department? Have you housed and fed communists? Have you stolen shoes from unemployed workers? Have you made a list of Nazi shops to be boycotted?" Every time I answered no, I was given a new shower of blows. When I cried out, the 5th of my tormentors pressed my face into the rags. After I had had at least 100 blows, I fell off the bench. I was then pulled off the ground and given such a blow in my face that I fell in a corner, damaging my knee. Then, together with the 2 communist workers who were also being tortured, I was forced to sing Deutschland, Deutschland über alles. I was compelled to sign a declaration that I would leave the Social Democratic Party, that I would never take part in politics again, and that I would report every Thursday to the Nazi office. Then I was given different treatment. I was given a glass of water. My clothes were brushed and given back to me. The leader told one of the men to take the lady out. The man held me up when I was about to fall down and shut the door after me with a polite "good evening." My husband reported the facts to the police, but was told that they were powerless. What was it that made these young lads carry out the inhuman cruelties recorded above? This hate was directed against a woman who for years had been in a responsible position, giving relief where it was needed, a woman old enough to be their mother. There is no question of this having been a private act of revenge. The lads not only made the woman strip and beat her, they also demanded names and addresses of Social Democratic Party members. They were acting on instructions from Nazi leaders. The leaders not only hushed up this crime, but when it had become known abroad, started proceedings against her for spreading atrocity stories. Nerve specialist exiled after being beaten. On Tuesday, March 21st, the nerve specialist Dr. Frankel, whose patients are mainly working-class people, was arrested in his flat in Berlin by a large detachment of storm troop men. He was taken to the Nazi barracks in the General Papestrasse and kept there till Thursday. In these 2 days he was interrogated several times, and on each occasion beaten with steel rods and dog whips. The results of this ill treatment, including damage to an eye by a lash from a whip, were established beyond question when he was released. Dr. Frankel was released on March 23rd after he had signed an undertaking for himself and his wife that they would immediately leave Germany and never return. Dr. Frankel, who is now living abroad, reported as follows on some of the details of his treatment. While I was there, about 15 young workers were brought into the room where I had been put. I can testify that these young workers were most cruelly ill-treated. As a doctor, I am of the opinion that at least 8 of them must have succumbed to the injuries they received. After they had been tied up and lighted cigarettes had been pressed into the soles of their feet, the storm troop men continued torturing them cruelly for hours. A Dr. Philippsthal of Beistorf Berlin was brought in at the same time as I was. He was seriously wounded. I am very doubtful whether he got through alive. Editorial note: on March 23rd, Dr. Philipsthal was taken to the Urbank Hospital, where he did in fact die. Reichsbanner and Social Democrat officials. The dementis issued by the Nazi government always tried to represent the excesses in the Nazi barracks as the arbitrary acts of individuals. We print here a number of reports from Kassel, which make it perfectly clear how closely the brutal acts are connected with the Nazi leadership. The Nazis did not take much trouble to distinguish between trials and torturings, which took place in different rooms of the same house. A deposition made by Hans Quer, a Reichsbanner leader, contains the following. On March 24th, 1933, at about 1 o'clock, I was arrested by 4 storm-troop men and 1 civilian and taken to the town hall. They said, "Herr Quer, you must come with us." And then I was taken along, 2 men holding my arms. I was taken down the outside steps, several Nazis who were at the top calling out to the public, "Here comes the Reichsbanner General Quer." I was taken to the public hall. The storm troop leader who took me is a commercial traveler selling gin. He was formerly employed in the welfare department. He stole some money and was dismissed and sentenced to 4 months' imprisonment. One of the storm troop men then took my particulars, including what party I belonged to. Then I was informed that I could go. As I went out, 2 Nazis got hold of me and prevented me from going. One of them went in to the man who had taken my particulars. Soon after, he came back and waved his hand, indicating that I was to be taken down to the cellar. There I was met by 10 to 15 storm troop men, who ordered me to take off my hat and coat. Then I was taken into a dark cellar, where there was a bench. One of the men went in front with an electric torch. The torch went out. I was forced down onto the bench, and for 10 or 15 minutes was beaten with rubber truncheons in a most brutal and inhuman way. When I fell off the bench half unconscious and begged them not to be so inhuman, they jeered at me and started beating me harder than ever. When I was coming out of the cellar, I did not walk quickly enough for them, and I was told, "You had too little. If you don't hurry up, you'll be brought back in again." Other cases in Kassel. Martin Meyer, aged 30, a municipal official of Bottnerstrasse 4, was taken out of the municipal offices where he was working at 12:30 on March 24th by storm troop men and taken to the public hall in the Karlstrasse. There he was taken into a dark cellar, laid on a bench, and beaten with rubber truncheons for half an hour, with 1 short interval. 1 blow hit his nose and another his right eye. Kaschel Seppel, trade union secretary, Schillstrasse 14, Kassel, was taken from the trade union house, along with Gerke, another trade union secretary, by 8 storm troop men on March 23, 1933 at 5 p.m. They were told they were to be tried at the public hall. They were put into a large hall. They heard cries coming from the rooms below. They waited an hour. They were then taken by 8 men into a dark cellar, laid across a table, and beaten by 6 men with rubber truncheons. They are now still confined to bed and under medical treatment. Their kidneys appear to be injured. Their urine is mixed with blood. Their backs, buttocks, and legs are injured. Ball Heinrich, a shopkeeper of Ludwigstrasse 2, Kassel, was arrested in his shop at about 3 p.m. on March 24, 1933, by 4 storm troop men and taken to the public hall. He was beaten in the street and threatened that he would be shot if he tried to escape. Maltreated in the public hall, he was made to take down his trousers and beaten for a quarter of an hour with rubber truncheons. Since then he has been in Kassel Hospital. Christian Wittrock, age 40, manager of the local health insurance department at Kassel, was taken out of his office by 2 storm troop men on March 24, 1933. He was taken down the outside steps, then through a crowd of people to the public hall in the Karlstrasse. There he was asked particulars about himself and then the Nazi in charge said, "Wittrock is discharged." He was then taken out as if he was going to be set free, but then taken into a dark cellar, laid on a bench there, and beaten with rubber truncheons. 2 blows on his head, his skin cut on his back, his buttocks and his legs. His clothes were stained with blood and partly torn, also his shoes. Then he was taken back into the hall and there beaten again. He is now under medical treatment. Even an officer maltreated. In the second week of March, a retired Lieutenant Anhalt, now district surveyor, living at Germaniastrasse 12, Tempelhof, Berlin, was arrested in his flat by 3 storm-troop men and 1 civilian. He immediately gave the alarm to the police, who arrived at his flat, but refused to interfere. The storm-troop men took Anhalt to the Hedemannstrasse. There he was first struck by the civilian for having called the police. Then he was taken into a room where there were already 12 or 13 men lying on straw. A storm-troop man, whom they called Oberfahrer, took charge of the lieutenant. There was no mention of the fact that Anhalt was charged with anything. Oberfahrer only knew that he had a former officer in front of him. He began to deliver punishment with 2 accomplices, and did not stop beating Anhalt until blood was streaming from his mouth and nose. Then he lifted up the injured man and showed him to the other prisoners lying groaning on the floor, saying, "See here, this swine is a lieutenant, and in such a fright that he can't stand straight." As Anhalt then stood up, the storm-troop man then kicked him behind his knees, and repeated this till Anhalt fell down. Another beating followed, which, however, did not seem to break the prisoner's spirit to the desired extent. Anhalt endured the blows in silence, and the storm-troop man shouted in fury, "You'll howl, you dog," and hit at Anhalt until he lost consciousness. Then he threw him on the straw by the other prisoners. Otto Gerke arrived at the Trade Union House, Kassel, at 3:30. 3 auxiliary police said, Number 1, "That's one of them." Number 2, "We'll come for him." Number 3, "That's Gerke of the Metal Workers Union." At 4:30, 4 storm-troop men entered the office. "Herr Gerke?" "Yes." "Put on your coat. You must come with us to be interrogated." In reply to my question whether the police president knew of this, I was told yes. 8 storm-troop men took me into the public hall. I was first taken to the guard room, then up into the hall and searched for arms. At about 5:30 I was summoned and taken by 2 storm-troop men down the steps into the cellar, where there were a number of bicycles in the passage. They told me to leave my hat and coat there. I was then taken down 12 steps into a lower cellar. In this cellar I was thrown onto a table. My head and arms were held down, and I was beaten with rubber truncheons for 15 to 20 minutes. I was then pulled up and told to say Heil Hitler, which I could not do. A doctor was summoned immediately, and he certified that I was suffering from loss of blood and nervous collapse. Kassel, March 28, 1933. I certify that I have treated Herr Otto Gerke, Josefstrasse, Kassel, for wounds on both arms, buttocks, legs, and calves. The wounds extend to the region of the kidneys. I have had Herr Gerke under treatment since March 24th. He is unable to carry out his duties and must be confined to bed. Signed. Propaganda film instead of dinner. At 6:30 a.m. on Monday, April 3rd, I was arrested by 2 protective corpsmen. Although my interrogation showed that there was no ground for my arrest, I was taken with 2 other prisoners to an ice cellar, an underground room 15 feet by 6, with no opening for either air or light. On Thursday at about 11:30 p.m. we were brought out of the cellar and put into a schoolroom. On Friday we thought that we were going to be released, but they had evidently only decided to make a spectacle of us. As we were put into a car, we were surrounded by a crowd of fascists who jeered at us. To our surprise, we were taken to a cinema where we were shown a film, Bleeding Germany. It was a film of incitement against France and included the shooting of Schlageter, One of the Nazis present began a speech. He imagined that he could win us over, but the main thing in our minds was that we had no dinner that day. At midnight on Friday, I was again fetched out by 2 storm troop men and taken to the police station. I was not able to answer their questions to their satisfaction, and the police inspector ordered me to be taken out again. An hour later, 2 protective corpsmen came for me, but they did not take me back to where I had been imprisoned. They drove the car out to a wood and pulled up there. I was pulled out and then thrown to the ground. Then they asked me, "Where are the arms?" I said, "I don't know of any." Then they started to beat me with rubber truncheons. One man, holding my face pressed into the sand. After a while they paused and again demanded, "Where are the arms?" I thought of trying to run, as I felt that nothing mattered any more, but then I noticed that they were getting tired. The man who was holding down my head let go, and then I felt a terrible blow on my head and lost consciousness. When I came to, I crept home. Tagore's experience. In the last week of April, the nephew of the Indian poet Rabindranath Tagore was arrested on suspicion of having plotted to assassinate Hitler. He was afterwards released and gave the following account of his experiences. The room in which I was put was underground, dark and without any air. 22 prisoners were already imprisoned there, all of them members of left parties, mostly communists. Many of them had already been there more than a month and had not yet even been interrogated. From time to time one of them would be summoned and taken out of the cell. We would hear terrible cries, and then our companion would be pushed back into the room. He would show us the traces of what had been done to him. A communist member of the Reichstag showed me the marks of ill usage on his body, saying simply, "Look, this is called national German culture." On the day I was arrested, a young man of the name of Ram was called out and returned with cut and bleeding thighs. The storm troop men had beaten him with steel rods because he had refused to give false evidence against his comrades. Early on Tuesday morning, a man was thrown into our cell who could hardly stand. His arm was swollen and in a sling, and his face was covered with blood. He was a trade union official of the name of Fuhler. Storm troop men had forced their way into the trade union house, and as Fuhler could not produce the arms which they demanded he should give up, they attacked him, broke his arm, pushed a stick into his side, ripped his cheek open nearly to his eye, knocked him down and kicked him. It was impossible to sleep at night. All the time the place was filled with the cries of the prisoners and the singing and laughter of our tormentors. In the next cell one prisoner was crying out for his mother without cessation. Often the storm troop men would come into the cells to carry out their brutalities. Documents which not even Goebbels can dispute. Kurt Haas, a film critic who took absolutely no part in politics, was arrested by civilians in his flat on the night of February 28th. He refused to go with the men, who produced no official document apart from storm troop credentials. Then they threatened that they would shoot him, and they beat him on his bed, tied him up and carried him, severely injured, to a car. Some police stopped the car on the way and rescued Haas. His wounds were bandaged in hospital, and then he was released. Up to this point there was nothing exceptional in this story, but Haas made a complaint to the Minister of the Interior, and what followed gives the case importance. Although the storm troop men were quite unable to produce any proof that they were acting on behalf of the authorities, they were subsequently fully protected by the ministry. Here is the reply sent by Goering's ministry. Prussian Ministry of the Interior, Storm Troop Connections Department No. 29-33, Berlin, 13 March 1933. To Herr Kurt Haas, Berlin, Wilmersdorf. Your letter dated 4/3/1933, addressed to the Minister of the Interior, has been passed to me as the appropriate officer to investigate and decide the matter. I have ascertained that the particulars given in your letter are inaccurate and distorted in essential points. The storm troop was completely in the right and acted with authority to take you into protective arrest, In accordance with the information I have received after the storm troop men had produced their credentials, as you yourself admit, they acted as the circumstances required. After putting on your clothes at their request, you yourself are responsible for having made it necessary to break your resistance by force, inasmuch as you suddenly began to shout and bluster, and attacked the storm troop members, biting one man's thumb so severely that the wound is not yet healed. From the facts in my possession, the degree of force used was not greater than was required to break your resistance. I see no grounds for taking any action against the storm troop leader and men concerned, but must rather reserve to the injured storm troop man the right to take proceedings against you. Head of the Storm Troop Connections Department in the Prussian Ministry of the Interior, signed Dr. Hale. This document should be of historical value. It can as little be disputed as the official announcement from Bielefeld. 3rd April 1933. The Social Democratic member of the Reichstag and Town Councillor Schreck was arrested yesterday. At present he is in hospital. End of chapter 7.